So if everyone can see my my screen, let's go ahead and get started. I've actually a few years back did a program when we had a succulent exhibit, and I did a Some Like It Hot lecture then, but this is not all about succulents. We're going to talk a little bit about succulents. We're going to talk about some of the adaptive strategies that plants have to survive the hot weather. We're going to talk about some things that just bloom in the summer and things that just look good this time of year. And if everyone would mute, that would be fantastic. All right, so with that, let's see if I can go to my first slide here. All right, so, you know, it's interesting we're talking about Some Like It Hot when this year has actually been one of the milder springs and milder summers that I can remember. We've had adequate rainfall and the nights have been cool, and the plants have done really, really well as a result. But it's not exactly our normal weather pattern. So anyway, and if you recall, this winter we got down really, really cold. And in 1989, we had this zone-defining winter, I call it, which we get down to 5 degrees. That's kind of getting into zone 7 territory. A lot of folks were saying we were in zone 8, USDA hardiness, plant hardiness zone. So basically, the higher the number, the milder the winter. So if that gives you any indication. So anyway, there's been debate whether we're zone 8 because a lot of zone 8 plants have been doing really well for many, many years here in Memphis. But this winter was sort of a zone-defining winter. So a lot of the camellias, the Indian hawthorn, the myrtles, clearas, tea olives, loropetalums, some other plants, they sort of really got dinged this winter. Some of them were killed outright. Most of them sprouted back from the roots. But anyway, that same thing happened in 1989. And people say, well, that's cold. So is it global warming? What's going on? Well, I just, from a gardener's perspective, there are trends that are that I see that are indicating that things are not on sort of a predictable normal cycle. I think more erratic weather is sort of the impacts of burning fossil fuels, and I think the science supports that as well. I'll give you an example of how mild we've been. You know, they talk about global warming. Well, we're really in a good space this year for growing cut flowers. This is English delphinium. And why am I showing you English delphinium? This is grown in the Dixon cutting gardens. And I would like to say this is 100% due to Kim's horticultural prowess, Kim Rucker, who is in charge of the cutting garden. But and there's some of that involved, but I must say that this is really about the mild spring and summer we've had. She actually cut the last of the English delphiniums this morning for using in the flower arrangements. So, you know, here we are in mid-July, mid going on late July, and we still have snapdragons going. We have the delphiniums going and some other things. So I think that's a testament to the fact that things are not normal with our weather patterns. Another example of how things are not normal. This is Spigelia Marylandica, and it's a native plant. It's a wonderful native plant, and it's usually a late blooming plant, and it likes a little shade, and it's very showy, and the red flowers usually appear in late June or early July. So it's pretty dependable midsummer bloomer. A lot of the woodland plants don't necessarily bloom in the middle of the summer. They bloom in the spring before the leaves are on the trees. But this is a plant that blooms a little later, very showy. And this year we had blooms on it in late May and early June. So another sign that things aren't on their sort of regular cycle. This is Indian pink, and it's a great plant if you're not growing it. It's slow to form a nice clump. There was a book written in the 80s on native plants by a couple from Texas, Sally Wazowski and her husband, and they and they featured on the cover, they featured a Memphis garden, the garden of late Vicki McDonald, and she had amazing stands of this, and they were in full bloom on the cover of the book, Gardening with Native Plants of the South. And so let me see if I can admit everybody here. Okay. Anyway, so what does this mean? I mean, there are some tough times for gardeners. You know, is this grapes of wrath gardening? Maybe not, but you know, it's always hard to garden in the Mid-South anyway. We have these heavy clay soils and these hot, humid summers. It's difficult enough, but we've kind of learned which cultivars work and what works. You know, we get mid 40s and inches in rainfall every year, but you know, 2 summers ago we were 18 inches below normal. So we're pretty good this year. So it kind of varies a lot. And then we're subject to these late freezes, like the late Easter freeze in 2007. It went from 70 degrees down into the teens. So plants are really good at dealing with heat and cold, but it's when the changes are slow. Plants can't adapt to real fast changes. And then, of course, we talked about the 2021 zone-defining winter. You know, you think about Atlanta and Chattanooga and other parts of the country, they have these, you can't water your garden with municipal water supply. They limit the amount of watering you can do. And so it spawned an interest in rain barrels and people using gray water. And friends of mine who garden in these areas, I know one friend was saying he was saving his bath water to keep his plants alive. So anyway, here's an extreme example of someone who's really started collecting water in rain barrels. Some gardeners really just prefer the rainwater, and they think that it's better than the tap water. It certainly doesn't have chlorine in it. All right, so what about plants that like it hot? You know they have a different way of dealing a lot of times with the wilting response. And herbaceous plants can get to this permanent wilting point, which is bad, okay? When they get to that permanent wilting point, they're going to probably sprout back up from the ground if they sprout back at all. Woody plants are a little bit more resilient. They have secondary buds, so they tend to just lose their leaves, and then they'll get a second swing at it, whereas a lot of herbaceous plants do not. And that's because of that woody structure that they have. Another response that plants have is they will lose their fruit. Instead of putting all that water into that fleshy fruit that they have, they'll conserve that water and they'll drop the fruit early. That's a mechanism that plants use to. But as the drought creates stress, it also causes secondary pests. There's even chemical signals that are sent out to insects whenever a plant is stressed. So you're gonna have more instances of bugs and disease and things whenever plants are stressed. All right, let's see if I can, okay. So you can, what can you do? Well, you can make adjustments to gardening approaches. You can deal with gardening practices, plant choices, and be accepting of other garden styles. We'll talk about some of these. Garden practices, these are pretty simple. Adjust your planting time. Planting in the fall, you can get something established. You don't have to water it as much. It doesn't have that stress. Mulching is a good technique to hold that water in. And amending the soil increases the water holding capacity, which is a really good thing to do anyway. With our heavy clay soil, it breaks it up and allows infiltration, but it also adds water holding capacity, which is key when you have periods of drought. We've used these water absorbing crystals, and you put these in the soil and they expand. I will caution you about pre-moistening them before you put them in the soil. I remember Greg Francis one time was using these water absorbing crystals in one of our egg cups, big planter in the cutting garden. And so he just mixed it in with the soil, filled the container and planted it. And then he went back and watered. And the next morning we came in and the plants were on the ground because these water absorbing crystals expand. So it was like a volcano coming out, spewing plants all over the place. So anyway, we've learned from that. And we use less of the water absorbing crystals now, but they do work in a pinch. Irrigation, there's 2 types of irrigation. You can have the overhead irrigation, and drip irrigation is what we use in the cutting garden here at the Dixon. And that's more precise. And a lot of that technology was developed in Israel, where the water is really an issue. And in certain parts of the country, it's the preferred method, and some it's mandated by covenants and laws. So But then scheduling your irrigation. You don't want to put your irrigation down in the heat. What will happen if you irrigate during the heat is it's just going to all evaporate, and you're not going to get the effective. You're not going to get the effectiveness of it. All right, let's go to the next one. Okay, here's the main thing we're going to talk about today are plant choices. Some plants are adapted to the heat, and we'll talk about some of the mechanisms they use to survive. Some of the succulent plants and cacti and drought-tolerant plants. But there are other plants that work well too. A lot of native plants work well if once you get them established. Most of these plants, you have to get them established, and then they'll take the heat pretty well. You know, but this talk is not going to be entirely about just plants that are sort of xeric or drought tolerant. A lot of the plants happen to be drought tolerant, but we're going to also talk about some things that just look beautiful this time of year. So we'll talk about some of the mechanisms for adaptations to dealing with heat. A lot of plants have these gray leaves which reflect light. They don't absorb as much. And then sometimes they have fuzzy leaves, and that helps create like this micro environment around the leaves so that they keeps it cooler, it shades them, that sort of thing. So, and if you've ever seen the sort of powdery stuff on leaves, the bloom as they call it on leaves, it's like a powder, a gray powder that it naturally occurs on leaves. That's all part of adaptations for heat. Some plants hold moisture in their roots. We'll talk about some succulents that do that. And then we're not going to get into a lot of detail, but just do know that there are these plants called CAM plants, and that stands for crassulacean acid metabolism, but you don't need to know that. Just know that sedums are in the family, the Crassulaceae, and so sedums are one of the big groups that do that. And what they do is they store the sun's energy, and then they open their pores to let the air in to practice photosynthesis at night. So there's many desert and Mediterranean plants that have adapted these strategies, but a lot of these plants are not really well suited for humidity and hot nights. So sedum is a big CAM plant we're going to talk about. I think most of you know sedums. And if you think about how easy they are to just break off a piece and stick in the ground and root, that's because they're not opening their stomates at night. They're not losing, during the day, they're doing it at night. So they're not losing moisture, which makes them real easy to propagate. There's also C4 plants, which is one of those CAM groups. It's kind of an alternate pathway that these plants use to make food. And there's a lot of grasses that do that. And pineapple is also a C4 plant. But anyway, that's a little too scientific for what we're talking about for gardening today. But just know that plants have these different strategies that they've adapted. It's pretty amazing that plants occupy every corner of the globe, and they've adapted strategies to live in harsh environments, and it's really quite miraculous. So I talked about fuzzy foliage. A lot of times the fuzzy foliage, when you're trying to conserve water around the leaf, a lot of times these plants will rot in our humidity because where they're natively growing, it's not as humid. So, but we've learned that this Stacey von Stein, which is called big ears, Helen von Stein, it's the best lamb's ear for us. It does not melt out. It's really tough. And anyway, most of the time it's sold under the name big ears, but the proper name is Helen von Stein. Here it is growing along another blue foliage plant that really doesn't like us. This is an ornamental fescue. So the last thing I'm going to say, and then we'll get on to looking at pictures of plants, but plants from wet areas you can take into dry conditions. But if you've got plants from dry areas, you can never take them into dry conditions. And this is something that I learned from Plato Tuleatus. He used to say you can take a plant up the hill, but you can't take a plant down the hill, which explains why a lot of conifers, things like that, have trouble with us here. As I said, natives are good. And most plants need to be established before they're drought tolerant. So we're going to talk about some xeric gardening. We'll start out with that. All right, several years back, some of you may remember that the museum was closed. We were undergoing renovations as called for by the master plan. We were getting new HVAC systems, generator backup, security systems. We were involved in a lot of renovations inside. We renovated the cafe. So the museum was closed that summer. And so I was given a little bit more budget, and our job was to make sure that we kept attendance numbers up, and the focus was on the gardens, and which was something that we didn't take lightly. And so with an increased budget and a big checkbook, I went to visit my friend in Nacogdoches, Texas. He's at the Stephen F. Austin Arboretum, and David Creech. And David and I went around to nurseries that sold a lot of succulent and cacti and plants in Texas. And we put together a huge truckload of these plants, shopping at different places, getting rare, unique, and unusual things. And so I went and made the trip. Originally, I was going to rent a U-Haul and drive them back myself, but we ended up, we had so much stuff, we ended up getting a truck to bring them. And so here they are when they're arriving. We're offloading the truck. And so here I am trying to boss Deborah Mason around, which is no easy feat. Anyway, Deborah was really helpful in all this, as well as all the Dixon staff. It was a great, fun thing. I think we all really enjoyed doing this, and it was something really different. So as you notice, a lot of the cacti were wrapped in this bubble wrap because they would bite. So we ended up getting some big welding gloves to move some of these around. Okay. So anyway, just all kinds of really cool sedums, cyperviviums, agaves, echiums, echeverias, just different real cool succulents, opuntias. You're looking at there with the pads here on the, looking at two different opuntias here, but it's just a lot of fun to have all these plants, but and do something different. Here's some, this is a little aloe called Elf that we were planting, Graptopetalum here. Just brought in just gallons and gallons. This is a really cool kalanchoe. Many of you know kalanchoe as a house plant. This one's called flapjacks. And keep in mind, many of these things were not hardy for us, so we wanted to get big plants and put them in. Here's a little, I think this was a yucca, and you see the little filaments coming off of it as well. Really nice. Here's a, you know, a lot of the opuntia are the prickly pear, I think is the common name, cacti. They will work here, and this is a little opuntia that we had that has no spines on it. I think it's called bunny ears, if I remember right, something like that, but a real nice little plant. And like I said, opuntias will grow here. There's some that are native west of here. And, you know, these plants, a lot of them are growing in these harsh environments, so they have to figure ways to survive. And so they have these adaptations. And I imagine the adaptation of the spines that are red would be a warning for something not to try to get the water that's in the core of this plant where it stores water so it can survive. But it turns out it's a real nice ornamental feature too that we can celebrate as gardeners. But again, we had welding gloves to plant these things. They really bite and they hurt. In fact, this is an extreme example. This one's called fish hooks. I believe it was a mammillaria or a barrel cactus, and it's called fish hooks because of the spines are so brutal. That was kind of fun. And then we had lots of agaves, and you know, agaves are the plants they make tequila out of. This was called Jaws because it has these pronounced teeth on it. And then there's an interesting thing about agaves. This is called ghosting. And what it is basically when these leaves were together in this central clump, this line is formed and it makes kind of a pattern on there. And then when they unfurl, it stays in the leaf. That's called ghosting. That's a really neat thing on these agaves. Of course, most of the agaves are not hardy here, but this one is. And this one is the whale's tongue agave. And we've had a whale's tongue agave growing here at the Dixon for a really long time. And anyway, this is a nice big plant. We've got one in an area we call the global warming bed, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So what the heck did we do with all these cactus, succulents? And I think the title of the exhibit was Some Like It Hot. And so we we had living stones like lithops and all kinds of, we got every unique plant that had adapted a strategy to survive in the heat. Every one we could find. We had them in the conservatory, throughout the grounds on the property. It was just a wonderful, it was really a wonderful exhibition that I think that's probably one of the larger plant-based exhibitions that we've done. So here's the Orgel rose bed, and there are no roses. We took the roses out, and then we were in the middle of the June Kaneko exhibition. Some of you may remember that. We have a couple of pieces here in Memphis, including one at the Dixon to sort of commemorate that. But this is the June Kaneko piece that was in the Orgel rose bed. And so we started out with this clean slate. And there's Susie to the right there. And we came up with a plan for these grids to lay everything out. So here I am sort of marking out the grid under Susie's supervision there. And we got a horde of volunteers, a great group and staff, and they were more than willing to help. And we started planting these big agaves and all these things in strips, kind of a different look for the Dixon. It was a lot of fun. And here you can see what it looked like when we were done. And these pathways were just really, really smart to allow people to have access. And this turned out really, really nice. We even did a mosaic. These were some old hydroponic trays that Susie had found, and she brought them to the Dixon. And so we kind of never could really figure out what to do with them. At one time we were celebrating the Panama Canal, and so she did this canal across the South Lawn, but this was the best use of them. They were these galvanized trays, and so we ended up turning them on edge and planting them full of succulents. And this is Kim Rucker and Deborah Mason's design. And the nice thing about having all the semperviviums and aeoniums and stuff in here is they didn't need watering. So, or they needed minimal watering. So anyway, some of the areas looked very desert-like. We brought in this archelite from over in Arkansas. We planted a lot of cacti at different areas. So it was a totally different look. And we talked about the xeric look, and that's what I think many people think of whenever they think of this, this sort of landscape. But it can be equally as beautiful. You can see the different Kanekos along the edge of every other plot in the cutting garden. Turned out very, very nice. Okay, another thing, since the museum and the galleries were closed, you know, the cutting gardens are used to produce cut flowers. We didn't have to produce all those cut flowers to be used in arrangements changed out twice a week like we normally do. So we had this extra real estate. So we decided that we would grow some cone flowers and try different ones and kind of have some cone flower trials. And so that year we planted every cone flower we could get our hands on in the cutting garden plots. We labeled them properly, and we sort of watched to see which ones held up right the best, they had the best structure, sort of looked at their heights, held their ray flowers out. So anyway, it was a lot of fun. It was a very different thing. And I'm proud that we can say that we kept the attendance numbers about the same. We didn't have a dip in attendance. Even though the museum was closed, we were still drawing people with the gardens and doing these gardens exhibition, which proved to be a real value for the Dixon. And I'm really proud of that fact. And I know that the gardens team worked hard, and we did great things to make that happen. So anyway, so that was our Some Like It Hot exhibition, which I wanted to include in this presentation. I talked about the whale's tongue agave, the hardiest of all of them. This is in our global warming bed, which I alluded to earlier. And this is a parking lot island with no irrigation. It's surrounded by asphalt. And so we've improved the drainage in this, and we planted some plants that can take the heat and the tough conditions. This agave has been unprotected over the past 10 winters, perhaps, eight winters, perhaps. Anyway, it's doing really, really well. And we mulch it with gravel, so we get some deflected heat from that. We'll talk about some of the other plants as well. This is Gold Rush Shore Juniper. A lot of conifers have these needles for foliage, and so they can take dry conditions really well also. And then this is a true cedar. This is Cedrus Atlantica, which is the blue atlas cedar. And this is the blue atlas cedar, and the name cultivar is Horstman. So just know it's a true cedar from the Atlas Mountains, and Horstman is smaller in stature. The Memphis Botanic Gardens has some giant blue atlas cedars. Anyway, but this is a smaller stature one, and the combination is so nice. And then I've got this euphorbia in here. This is euphorbia. It's called Mediterranean Spurge. Obviously wasn't named with marketing in mind, but
on the other side,
Yeah.
it looks color.
here, can everybody mute? Let me mute here. There we go. But anyway, here's your blue atlas cedar. You can see the sort of little clusters of the needles that make it resistant to drought stress. And here's that agave again, and at the foot of it is this Euphorbia wolfenii, which is the Mediterranean spurge. Again, like I said, not named with marketing in mind. This is a version of it called Shorty. And see, this is another blue-green foliaged conifer. This is the Arizona Cypress. And this is called Carolina Blue, I believe, is the cultivar. And this is Shorty Euphorbia, real nice plant. Here it is. If you want the Latin name, here's the Latin name. It's Euphorbia Caracas subspecies wolfenii. So this plant is handicapped from the beginning because its Latin name is difficult and its common name as spurge doesn't really do much for it. But it's a beautiful plant with these chartreuse flowers and the blue-green foliage. It looks so great with that agave, and it likes the same conditions. I will warn you that these have milky sap in them, so when you break the stems, there's a little milky sap. And believe it or not, this is the same genus Euphorbia as a poinsettia that you have in your house for Christmas. So if you break the stem on a poinsettia, you'll notice the milky sap. If you break the stems on this, you'll notice the milky sap. So this is completely hardy outdoors. About the only way to kill it here in Memphis is to overwater it, which happens quite often either with rainfall or with irrigation. So give it good drainage. Here it is at Cheekwood in Nashville, and it's growing all on the hillside behind the mansion there at Cheekwood. It does exceptionally well. So drainage is the thing. I think it can take our humidity. And here it is again with those chartreuse flowers, which I really like. And here is Carol Reese. I caught her red-handed. This is at Cheekwood. She's nicking some cuttings from this. This is a rosemary, prostratus. I think it's probably Huntington's carpet, but it shares the same spot with the Euphorbia wolfenii. You can see it here. And here she is taking some. Carol just retired. They just had a retirement party for her. So Carol has contributed so much and promoted so much around the country and internationally for Mid-South horticulture. So thank you, Carol. Here in the global warming bed, you could see that in the global warming bed, you could see that rosemary there as well. Another plant that occupies that same space that will bloom all summer long, really doesn't get geared up till it's going hot. So this does like it hot. This is a native salvia. And this is either Furman's red or radio red. And it's called Salvia Greggii. Salvia Greggii. And it's native to Texas and maybe up into Oklahoma and Mexico. And it's a nice form. We just purchased in a form and put it in the Mary Alice Quinn butterfly garden. That's a purple flowered form. And I can't remember the name of the purple flowered one, but anyway, it's exceptionally nice. We're just trying that one out, but great for dry conditions, blooms all summer. You almost never need to water it. Salvia Greggii. And I think this is radio red or Furman's red. Nice little flower. Hummingbirds seem to like it as well. This is back to the Arizona cypress that I mentioned earlier. Sorry, I got this a little out of order. This is Arizona cypress, and this is Carolina blue. Really nice foliage on it. Drought tolerant, as you would think something named Arizona cypress is. In fact, you got to plant it sited in an area where it's well drained. Tends to be pretty fast growing and almost short-lived here in Memphis. I planted several of them here on the Dixon property, and I don't think any of them are around today, but they grow real fast. Maybe it's when they get in that heavy clay, they're just not happy, and they tend to succumb to that. So another plant, we're going to talk about other plants other than sort of these succulents and these conifers and things. Another plant that's an annual that you don't want to plant until it gets hot are the caladiums. We used to plant these they're annuals for us. Caladiums, we've done some big displays of caladiums that have been really well received. And the caladiums, we used to start them in the greenhouse. And we found that if you wait till the soil temperatures warm up, you can plant the little tubers in place like we do tulip bulbs, and they will come on and be fine. Look over here. This is back when we did the Staining Thorn's Daughter exhibit when the aliens invaded the Dixon. So, and I tell you, not to be a spoiler alert, but these sculptures are coming back. So just look for that in the future. This is really an exciting thing. I do believe the rumor is that we'll be getting these sculptures back. So a little spoiler alert. They were a lot of fun. So here's the caladiums. I took this morning behind the Farnsworth Education Building, and these are the tubers that we planted out. So it doesn't take them long to catch up when it gets hot. So just remember that these caladiums like it hot, and by the end of the summer, they'll be spilling over into the pathways. So kind of a ubiquitous plant that likes the heat and humidity. It's kind of ubiquitous in the Mid-South. We're kind of known for are the crepe myrtles. And obviously there's some that are hardier than others. And I talked about the zone defining winter. And that's how we discovered things like Sarah's Favorite and Natchez and some of these other ones were really, really hardy, because the ones that were not hardy were discovered because they died back to the ground. But anyway, I put this in here because it's something that likes it hot, that gets geared up in the summer. And we have a lot of problems with it now. There's the crepe myrtle scale, bark scale, and it can be controlled with a single treatment of imidacloprid, but it's kind of a new pest. But I think there's a danger in overplanting something. When something becomes so ubiquitous and it's so common in an area, you're setting yourself up for pests to move in, right? Think about a field of cotton. Okay, when you've got a cotton boll weevil or a pest, it can move freely because there are so many plants that can host it out there. And the same is true of crepe myrtles. And that's why Mother Nature was sort of correcting that monoculture of crepe myrtles that we have, and gave us crepe myrtle bark scale. But the trunks are especially nice on the ones that are hardy. And these have been planted, and we hadn't had a dieback in a long time. But I think this is Natchez. It may be Sarah's Favorite, but anyway. The other thing about the crepe myrtles is they leaf out late, which provides you an opportunity to plant things under them. Although it's bone dry underneath them, it's usually generally wet in the spring before they leaf out. So things like a lot of narcissus or daffodils can be planted under a lot of these plants that don't leaf out till it's late. The Vitex is one that looks pretty much dead until May. It leaves out late. It doesn't like anything till it gets hot. This is the Vitex tree or the chase tree, and a great plant that has a long bloom season with these purple flowers. You can cut it all the way back to the ground and it'll come back out and bloom because it blooms on new wood, much as the way a crepe myrtle and some of these other summer flowering plants do. And just a real showy plant. I was introduced to this plant as a kid. It was a beekeeper's plant, and apparently the honey from it is supposed to be something special. But I collected little seedlings around a mother plant, and all of the seedlings were sort of this muted blue, and you didn't get that vibrant purple from the seedlings. So I recommend getting named cultivars if you're going to plant Vitex. There it is. There's a close-up of the flowers, and of course the leaf looks like marijuana, but it's a great plant. And I see it being utilized more and more. And again, you could cut it back as hard as you want. I don't cut it all the way back to the ground. I try to leave a little bit of structure there, because if you cut it all the way back to the ground, you'll get a lot of flop in the plant. All right, some of the hydrangeas, although they're not really drought tolerant plants, they do like it hot and they like the summer heat. And they're another one that doesn't leaf out till late. I would group this with the crepe myrtle and the vitex as being a plant that stays dormant until late, which gives you an opportunity to plant some spring flowering things underneath it, especially like daffodils and things like that. There are a whole host of these. There's been sort of this explosion of interest in these panicled hydrangeas for a long time, for the past 10, 15 years. I remember seeing my first panicle hydrangea, which was tardiva, and it was a 20-foot plant at the Memphis Botanic Gardens years and years ago, probably 30 years ago. Since then, we've got many, many cultivars. You do realize that the flowers here are the sterile flowers. The flowers inside here are the fertile flowers. So the sterile flowers are the showy ones, and these are kind of open panicles. Some of them are just almost infertile, and they have all sterile flowers, which are really, really showy. Like this one, which as a result, the blooms get so heavy, they just flop over. So this is why I like to, on these cutback shrubs that bloom on new wood, I like to cut them back and leave some structure there so that they don't flop. But look at the pink coloration on this, and see how big the heads are? They're bigger than footballs. They're really nice. This is one of my favorites because it's well-behaved, short stature. This is Hydrangea paniculata Bobo. It has a cute name, and it's lower, and the blooms are very, very, has a lot of sterile flowers, so it's very showy, but they're smaller, and it tends to flop less, and it's a more compact habit. It's a real winner. That's Bobo. Another plant that I don't know about likes it hot, but certainly doesn't bloom till it gets hot. And we've learned that a lot of these native azaleas really don't really need more sun than we originally give them. This is the latest blooming. Most of you think of native azaleas as a spring blooming plant. This is the latest blooming of all the native azaleas, and it's orange. And it's known as the plum leaf native azalea, Azalea prunifolia. And I love this plant, mainly because it blooms so late. It's not fragrant like a lot of the other native azaleas, but again, it's named for its leaf. It's native to one small area down near Callaway, Georgia, in Pine Mountain, Georgia, and that's the only place that it's native found. And I hope to get out and see it in bloom sometime. I would love to do that. But we have some really notable specimens here on the property that are decades old, and we love our native azaleas here. So this is Prunifolia, or plum leaf native azalea. See if I can move a little faster here. Sorry, I've got a lot to cover. We talked about cam plants and the grasses that are the cam plants. This is a Pinnacetum, and they're called fountain grass. And this is one called Hamelin. And Hamelin's been around for a long time, and it's more dependable than the one called Piglet. There's one that has a cute name called Piglet that's supposed to be shorter, and it's a good plant, but I have trouble getting it through the winter with our heavy clay soils. And I've learned from a local gardener and gardening friend, Liz Manugian. She's on my gardens committee here at the Dixon. She has really experimented with these, and there's one called Praline, and that's the one that we're planting now because it will come back after the winter in our heavy clay soil. So Hamelin does a decent job of coming back. Piglet is not a winner for us, but Hamelin seems to be performing really, Praline seems to be performing really, really well. So the Stipea Tenuisma, the Mexican feather grass, about the only way you can kill it is to overwater it, loose and airy. I've seen it used in some commercial plantings out in Germantown and along Poplar Avenue, and I think I hope they don't overwater it with the irrigation system. This is one of my favorite native grasses. This is sort of seeing the bloom start on it, but this is panicum, or switchgrass, and these native grasses are really, really tough, drought tolerant once established. I like them because they have this blue-green foliage, and they stay upright even in bad weather, wind, and storms and such. So that's one of my favorite Pinnacetums. It's called Pinnacetum Northwind. Pinnacetum Northwind. All right, this is a Pinnacetum that Kim grows in the cutting garden. I think it's an annual, but it's aptly named Frosted Explosion. And Kim and I always have a debate over this because I don't know how you could use this in floral arranging, but I think talented floral arrangers can use this but it does look like a frosted explosion. Here it is growing next to some zinnias, and that was taken a couple days ago here in the cutting garden. Some annual pinnasedums. This is one called Vertigo. We learned about this from the UT Experiment Station in Jackson, and it's called Vertigo. I guess it gets so tall that that it gets vertigo. I don't know, but here's a sedum that we're using a lot in our annual color beds. It's perennial, but we use it as an annual. This is Sedum Lemon Ball. Here's the Vertigo again with its bloom spikes. This is another sedum, which is a cam plant. It's a replacement for Autumn Joy called Autumn Fire. The verdict's still out. I don't know that it's superior. A lot of sedums, you don't want to overwater them or they'll get floppy. Here it is growing in the parking lot island. I was talking about differences in climate and things like that. Well, our weather here has been so strange. And I told you about the Indian pink having a weird bloom time and just some things that us being able to grow cool season plants really late. This is Allium millennium, and this was taken actually yesterday. And so ours is just now getting started. Tom Pellet, who was a garden designer here in Memphis, he's moved back to South Carolina, and he was sending me pictures of his Allium millennium looking good in early June. So we're way behind South Carolina on that. And I think it's a little late going this year because of the cool weather, which is kind of weird because the Spigelia was early. So anyway, here's what hopefully it'll look like later in the season. And this is an ornamental onion. It's a perennial. I think it was perennial plant of the year, either last year or this year. It's called Allium millennium. Allium is the genus for the onions. So it comes back, it's a perennial forest and a very nice plant. Good color and a nice form to use in the landscape. This is the Helen von Stein again in the landscape, are also known as big ears, lamb's ear. The Joe Pye weeds. I talked about learning from Plato Tuleatus, you could take a plant up the hill, but you couldn't take a plant down the hill. And this is a prime example. Once the Joe Pye weed is established, it can take fairly dry conditions. This is one called Baby Joe, but it's still 3 foot plus, maybe 4 foot tall. Here it is in the Mary Alice Quinn butterfly garden. I love this plant. It attracts butterflies and pollinators. It's a native. It's a wonderful plant. I can't say enough good things about this dwarf eupatorium. Joe Pye weed. Now another one not named with marketing in mind, I guess. The Garas, this is a Gara called Rosie something that Kim had in the cutting garden. Garas are just naturally drought resistant. They sort of have this wispy foliage that you could almost count as a see-through plant. Anyway, I love the Garas, and they are known for they're good cut flowers, and they're known for being tough and drought tolerant. Well, this plant has a carrot-like taproot. I can remember when I was younger trying to dig this plant up as a teenager and bring it home with me. And I know that's kind of not a thing you should do today, but I was going to give it a good home, I promise. I had very poor success rate moving it in flower. So I learned if I go and I flag where it is with a golf tee or something like that, you can come back and dig it, and dig that carrot-like taproot when it's dormant. And it's it doesn't even know it was moved. So anyway, again, that's an adaptation for survival that the butterfly weed, this is our native butterfly weed. It is the host plant for the monarch butterfly. And it's poisonous to other critters that a lot of other critters that try to eat it. And it gives the monarch its toxicity to other birds and such. But really just a really showy plant, usually mid to late May here. And anyway, its adaptive strategy is to store energy in a big carrot-like taproot. So remember that whenever you're trying to move it. All right, a few more plants that we've offered in our plant sale. This is blue Boa Agastachi. These are known as hyssops, and the hyssops are also very drought tolerant once they're established. And the foliage is deer-proof. It's very fragrant. I love the hyssops, and they'll go for a long season. You cut them back, and they keep flowering. Another native that are the Texas blue stars, the Amsonias, and the Amsonia Hydrangeas as well. There's several new cultivars. I hadn't had as good a luck with blue ice as maybe storm cloud, but it has these blue flowers. And once these are established, you don't have to supplement the watering hardly at all. It's very, very tough, and they like it hot. This is Elizabeth Lawrence's mystery plant. It's had several name changes. It was Calamaris at one time. I learned it as Astromoea mongolica, but most people just know it as Elizabeth Lawrence's mystery plant. There's a gardener from North Carolina named Elizabeth Lawrence. She's was a famous garden designer who's long since passed, but she had this plant in her garden, and it was known as Elizabeth Lawrence's mystery plant. It will bloom all summer. It does not mind the heat. You cut it back, and it keeps going. It blooms like an annual. Great plant. Another native plant that has sort of had breeders have had a field day with, and they've bred all these different colored forms, and are native Baptisias. And they have that blue-green foliage, which would be indicative that they're drought tolerant. But once you get these established, they don't need supplemental watering. They're great for prairies and meadow plantings. And they're in the pea family, as you can tell by the shape of the flowers. And really, really showy. And then you end up with this bush. They're almost like a subshrub that comes out late. You can cut them all the way back to the ground after they're at the end of the season or in the spring, late winter, early spring, or in the fall. Cut them back. Here's the little Joe I was talking about. Nice plant. Philippendulas, the meadow ruse. They're another one that you don't see used very much in horticulture here in the United States. When I was in Holland at the garden of Me and Rice in Holland in the Netherlands, she had used this extensively, and it's a great plant. It should be used more. There's also white forms of it. We've offered it in sale. How am I doing on time? I think we're okay. We've got about 8 more minutes. So this is the red hot poker, the Kniphofia, and they come from Mediterranean climates, so they don't like our humidity too much, but they've been breeding for humidity tolerance. And, you know, we've done okay with these. We've got several in the Mary Alice Quinn butterfly garden. We've offered these newer varieties in our plant sale, and just give them some decent drainage, and they seem to do fine. The red hot pokers, Kniphofia, they're real fun. Lantanas, when it gets hot, they just thrive on it, and they can take it pretty dry. These are 2 varieties that they'll keep throwing off flowers all summer long till frost. They don't get started till it gets hot, but once they do, they keep going and going and going. This is Miss Huff, which is a hardy form, and then Chapel Hill Yellow is another form. Both of those are really hardy lantanas. You don't have to plant them every year. They'll come back. Again, cut them back in fall or in late winter, early spring. Here's some growing at the Dixon. That's Chapel Hill Yellow. Lavenders, a lot of herbs like the heat and humidity. I mean, don't like the humidity, but like the heat. So if you give them good drainage, some of these newer herbs do really well. We know phenomenal lavender. This is supposed to be the improved version, sensational. We offered in our plant sale, so lavenders like it hot for sure. The cat mints, some of the cat mints that we have, they'll keep blooming if you cut them back. This is the one called Summer Magic with this little euphorbia here, really nice. The Nepeta or cat mints are really good in the heat. Another plant that I think should be more widely planted is this Petrenia. It's not named with marketing in mind again, but it's a great cut flower. Has these pale mustard yellow flowers, and it really gets going in the heat. It'll seed around a little bit, about like the verbena from Argentina, the verbena bonariense. It'll seed around a little bit. Penstemon, another prairie plant that can take the drought once it's established, give it supplemental moisture till it gets up to size, and then you can cut back on the water and it'll still throw off flowers and survive and do well. This is a plant that I kind of didn't care much for initially. It has fragrant foliage. It tends to run a lot, but I think that's its best attribute. You can use it in a shrub border along the edge of a woodland garden and just let it run, and it pulls out easily. It's a plant that's drought tolerant, and the bees and the insects love it. The pycnanthium, the mountain mint, it's a nice plant. If you need some architecture and some scale in your garden, this is another native called the giant coneflower. And I've seen this growing along the roadsides in Missouri. But this thing gets maybe 7, 8 foot tall, certainly 6 feet tall. As the name implies, Rudbeckia Maxima, another one that once established, you can cut back on the water. I think that's a switchgrass behind it. We talked about the lamb's ears. This is the same genus. Stachys is the genus for lamb's ears. And there's a couple of Stachys that are out there now that are in the same genus, but so different. You would never guess they were a lamb's ear. This is one called Humelo, which is named for a Dutch gardener, Piet Oudolf, who gardens in the Netherlands. He's kind of internationally famous. He did some work on the High Lines. He did the Lurie Gardens and Millennium Park in Chicago. So he's done some big high-profile things, and this is named after his hometown, Humelo in the Netherlands. I've been there. This is another version of that, a pink version of it, pink cotton candy. So we talked about herbs. This tricolor sage I grew in Oregon, and we've got it planted in one of the med beds here at the Dixon, and it's doing well. We've improved the drainage, and it seems to like it hot, as well as this little dwarf yarrow. I forgot the name on this, but we had this in the plant sale, and we had some left over, and we planted this little yarrow. Maybe it's Little Moonshine or something, but it's a nice little yarrow that works well. And then I've got the last slide I have are the cardoons, and they really add some architectural element. They're big, nice foliage. They'll take it dry without supplemental irrigation. They work well in containers. Here's the blooms on them. They're related to artichokes, as you can tell. And here they are in the ground. Isn't that wonderful? I mean, this plant will get 3 feet tall given the right conditions. And it has that blue-green foliage. It almost looks like a Grecian pattern plant, but it's not at all. It's actually an artichoke or cardoon. Anyway, here it is growing. We just planted these in May, and here it is growing, and there's that damn mulberry weed coming up around it. But anyway, there it is at the Dixon, and here's that yarrow again. These are in the med beds. We're going to watch these progress as we go on. So anyway, that's my last slide. And so, okay.
There's the question about before we get in pot, can you plant it in pots?
Okay, I'm going to look at the chat here, and let me end my screen sharing if I can here. Let's see if I can figure this out. Okay. Okay, well, let's see. I'm trying to end my screen sharing. Let's see. Okay, these things are like cats. They sense my fear. Here we go. There we go.
Yeah.
Pause share.
Stop share.
Stop share. There we go. All right. So hopefully everybody can see my face again here. Okay. Got some questions here in the chat, so I'm going to go through some of these. Let's see. Will we have a Phoebe Cook lecture this year? If so, who's the speaker? Many of you may know that we had a virtual Phoebe Cook lecture last year, which was less exciting. We had Paige Dickey, who started the Garden Conservancy. We like to bring people here to Memphis and show them some Southern hospitality and really get to know them. And that was not the case this past year but due to Zoom, we were able to have a Phoebe Cook lecture. So this year, fingers crossed, our plan is to have the Phoebe Cook lecture in person. And we really haven't advertised it yet, but we have a floral designer from New York. His last name is Lewis. It's
Lewis
Lewis, excuse me, his last name is Miller. Lewis Miller is the floral designer from New York, and he does these pop-up shows. So he'll go into a subway stop or a blighted community or something that needs a little freshening up, and he will do these pop-up floral designs for everybody in the community to enjoy. He has a new book coming out in October, but there's more details to follow. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but do know that yes, we will have a Phoebe Cook lecture. It's Lewis Miller, who's a floral designer from New York, and we're very excited about it. So thank you for asking about that. All right. Let's see if I have more messages here. Okay. Regarding water conservation, we use water collected from our dehumidifier for our flowering plants. We make sure to clean the dehumidifier on a regular basis so it doesn't get nasty. That's a great idea. Instead of throwing it out or putting it down the drain, you can just take water out of the air. Okay. Someone wants to know if you can grow the Euphorbia wolfenii in pots. Does exceptionally well in pots in Memphis. And I love the color combinations. And if you can, there's a version called Shorty that is a smaller version that works really, really well. So if you can find Shorty, that's the one to get. It's not really, most nurseries aren't offering it. We bring it in for the plant sale. I get it from a contact in Oregon. We may try to start propagating it, but it's a great plant to use. It's not one that's going to be there for 15 years. You know, most of them that I plant survive a few years and then we get a real wet summer and they don't make it, but they're certainly worth it because you'll get several seasons out of it. And then it'll throw off little seedlings that are welcome to see in your garden. All right, let's see if we have any more questions. How do you get rid of mulberry weed? Keep pulling. You know, they say that it takes, if you let it go to seed, it'll take you several years to get on top of it. It seems to grow when it's hot. You're talking about a plant that likes it hot. Mulberry weed certainly likes it hot. And it will flower when it's really young. So, but it is an annual weed. It's Fatuosa villosa is the name, and the villos refers to the hairs on the leaf. It was brought in from a nursery down in Louisiana, and it is quickly taken over to be enemy number one here at the Dixon. But you just got to stay on top of it. You can hit it with glyphosate if you're not opposed to that. And just keep pulling, keep pulling, keep pulling. In some of the pathways and stuff, I once bought a torch to torch some of it because I've heard that it'll kill the seeds. But the torch I'm kind of scared of using here at the Dixon because I don't want to burn something. It sounds like a jet engine. And when you're burning weeds, it smells like a coffee shop in Amsterdam. But anyway, it's moderately effective, but you can't do that anywhere near plants. So you just have to hand pull when it's coming up around other plants. And it's very, very adept at hiding in other plants. So anyway. All right, I've got a question about welder's gloves for handling spiny yucca. Yeah, some of those cacti, we just didn't know what to do with, and you have to sort of pick them up to get them out of the containers. And after you go home with spines in your hands a few times, you learn that you've got to do something. So it turns out really thick welding gloves are in order, and you still have to be very, very careful. All right. Someone's asking about stilt grass. You know, sometimes I run over at Shelby Farms, and there's a really good the Tour de Wolf trail over there that mountain bikers use. And I was running with someone, and there was nothing but that stilt grass. It was a solid stand of it, and they said, "Oh, this grass is just so beautiful. What is it?" And I had to let them know that it was a non-native, and it displaces a lot of native plants. It is very easily taken out by herbicide, but you really need to get something established underneath it to keep it at bay. I think mulching is a good technique. So anyway, the stilt grass is a problem. You could spray it out. You can pull it. It's not the worst weed. I think that in my mind, that mulberry weed is still enemy number one. Someone made the comment that they use grill tongs to handle a lot of their large cacti, and that is a good idea. I think that works well, but I think that some of the bigger ones we really couldn't use tongs on. They were just too big. Some of these big barrel cactus and such. So Anyway, well, that is all the questions I have. Anyway, thank you for listening to my Munch and Learn. I hope to be in front of a live group in person here soon. As I said, I really am not a fan of the Zoom, but it has been a great tool to get us through some hard times. So hopefully we're on the other side of that. So anyway, if anyone wants to unmute and say something, or if anybody has any questions for me that didn't make it into the chat, I'm willing to entertain that now before we depart.
Thank you, Dale.
All right, thank you. Mary Haley, how are you? I'm
great, thanks. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm okay. It's been an interesting summer for sure, but anyway, hopefully we're all getting back to normal here. Look forward to seeing you soon.
You too. Thank you.
Fun program. Thanks, Dale.
All right. Thank y'all. Thanks everybody. See you next time. Bye-bye.